And I was like, as a scientist, there's just no way. It set off all the red flags where I was like, there's just no chance that this is true. But I was so desperate. I was coming up on 2 years of just immense suffering.
And it's such a shift when people are able to use their physical symptoms as that form of communication, as that way to recognize that their mind is trying to tell them something and to try to figure out what the mind is trying to say.
Welcome to The Story Behind the Symptoms, a podcast from Symptomatic.me. Your host is David Clark, MD, a board-certified gastroenterologist who successfully diagnosed and treated over 7,000 patients with neuroplastic pain or illness. Each episode, we dive into our guests' life experiences to uncover the deeper causes of their symptoms. By listening to their story, you will gain insights that advance your own journey towards knowledge that becomes healing.
Hello, and welcome to the Story Behind the Symptoms podcast. My name is Dr. David Clark. I'm the president of the Association for Treatment of Neuroplastic Symptoms and board certified in gastroenterology and internal medicine. In this podcast, we talk to people who have suffered neuroplastic symptoms about their journey and about the issues that may be responsible for their condition. My guest today is Matt Goldberg, who is going to introduce himself.
Hey, everybody. Dave, thanks so much for having me. Hey, everyone. I'm Matt Goldberg. I'm a research scientist and director of experimental research at the Yale program on climate change communication. I study persuasion, social influence, how we can best build public and political will on climate change and a range of other important social, political, and other issues. In my free time, as we'll learn in this story, I've got a certain kind of intensity to me. And I think that's been part of the story leading up to this point that we'll get into regarding pain. So let's get into it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I should add that Matt is internationally known for his work on public communication around climate change, and it's really an honor to have him with us today. All right, well, let's begin the way I do with all of my patients in the office, and that is, what symptoms did you have? When and where did they begin, and what was their progress over time?
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of history to get into that leads up to the point where the symptoms started to show. And so when I was about 10 years old, I discovered just the value of just like putting your whole self into something. I was hugely into playing football, and I started to discover just the value of training and bringing some intensity to what you do. And that just really was a huge gift to me. And that paid off for a very long time. It was instilled in me to try to outwork everybody on the field, that kind of thing. And that worked personally and professionally for a very long time. And so midway through college, I started to fall in love with psychology. My home field is social psychology. I decided to get a PhD in that area. And that started about a 10-year journey to become a top tier researcher. I was like, I'm aiming for the best of the best. I'm going to put every ounce of my being into this. And I started chasing that. It went beautifully. I got my PhD. I landed a wonderful postdoctoral fellowship at Yale, and I was able to stay on as faculty soon thereafter. And so still going well, reaping all the rewards of being a go-hard. And the pandemic hit in 2020. I felt like I really needed to step my game up even further to meet the expectations and everything around this new position that I was stepping into. And so I cranked things up even more. I was on more than a decade-long sprint of barely ever taking breaks, pushing myself to the max, and I just really love that. And about a year into turning it up, to 11, I started to get some hand and elbow pain. And at that point, it was very familiar in the sense of this was part of my normal cycle. I fall in love with a thing, do it so intensely until my body breaks, and then I start to rebuild. Round and round we go in the cycle. And at this point, the pain started to increase and increase and increase until the point where I couldn't work for more than a half hour at a time. At that point, I'd been spending 15 or 16 hours a day at a computer, and my energy didn't seem to run out, but then I kind of went off this cliff with the pain significantly increasing. It almost felt like an electric shock each time I hit the keyboard. And so I could barely use my phone. I was getting kind of panicked as to what would happen with my life and career, because at that point I was just 1 year, not even 1 year into a new position.
15 or 16 hours down to a half an hour.
Yeah, like it quickly
Over
went
how long a period of time did that fall take
a
place?
few weeks.
Goodness.
A few weeks.
All right. Sorry to interrupt.
And
I just had to
no,
clarify.
yeah, important stuff. At that point, I was like, all right, the usual. I'll do some self-treatment. I'll do some stretches. I'll watch some YouTube videos and learn how to address this issue. And then after a month of trying, I was like, ooh, this is going to require some professional help. So I go to my general physician. They are pretty confident it's a combination of carpal tunnel and tendonitis in the elbow. And so this combination on both sides. And so this became something where I was like, all right, I have to take this really seriously. And so I went into physical therapy, and that seemed to help quite a bit. But after several months of working at that, I was kind of stuck. I was, 40% of who I was. And so the pain started to arrive in different places, but still in ways that made sense given all the computer work I was doing. So neck pain and back pain and stuff like that. And it was all like along this same chain. I had a nerve conduction test that said I had done nerve damage to my ulnar nerves. And so that very much instilled the structural perspective in me. And also everyone that I talked to, I spoke to multiple hand specialists and others that focus particularly on these kinds of injuries. And I did all the research I could, and it seemed that this was the route. And so after several months of physical therapy, I was, barely halfway to better, but it was an intense struggle. I developed this routine to try to get myself back to zero when I woke up. So I'd wake up in immense pain. I was sleeping with these big braces on. I tried all the contraptions, all the stretches, all the different things. And I just could not break through. So I was very much in this maintenance phase, and I had done so much.
Let me hold you there for just a minute. Normally, when I'm interviewing a patient in my office, I just shut up and listen. I mean, I think it's really important for clinicians to do that. But since we're in a podcast, I'm going to interrupt just a little bit from time to time.
Let's go.
And I'm just curious about all these clinicians that you saw. Did any of them bring up the possibility of a mind-body cause for your condition?
Not the first few. There was some towards the deeper into my recovery that this started to come up, but essentially the first two physical therapists were very much like, all right, we've got these structural mechanical things to work through. And then I got to one where they were more interested in my neck, because I have a deep history of playing sports that are pretty tough on the neck, football and wrestling. And so they were concerned that, well, if you're addressing things at the wrist and the elbow, and you might not be getting it at the neck. And so that might be it. So we worked on that for a while. And then finally, I discovered a specialist that focused on this particular kind of thing. So overuse injuries, particularly for people that work a lot at computers. And it was still very much physical therapy and manual work and structural approaches. But there was some level of coaching that I was getting that was like, you got to eventually just try to get back to normal. You have to have less of an intensity to the work that you're doing. And so there was some elements of that, but it wasn't full-fledged mind-body approach that really opened the doors to real recovery.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just, you're in the middle of one of the most sophisticated medical centers in the world, and body causes for symptoms are responsible for 40% of people that come to see a primary care physician. And so you would think it would be in the mix as a possibility for, especially when you have symptoms on both sides of your body that are more or less symmetric and similar. Pretty coincidental for a physical abnormality to be almost exactly the same on both sides. That would stand out to me. I'm not, obviously a biomechanical specialist. I'm a gastroenterologist, but still, just from general medical background, to have the same things going on both sides, very, very unusual. All right. Once again, I would never do this with a patient in my office. I just sit there and listen. It's far better. But for podcast purposes, whenever I get really curious about something, I get the answer early on. All right. So you are in a maintenance phase. You are waking up in pain. You are having your was on. I can only try to imagine what that must have been like. All right. How did things go from there?
Yeah. So at that point, I'm doing my best with my work to stay afloat and to still thrive in my career. So I had all of this. I had some wild setups to continue computer programming by voice. I had eye trackers to mouse on my computer. I had the most elaborate setups to try to keep going because it felt very much like every minute that I type, I'm causing damage. And so that was leading to this loop. And so when I was getting treated by this specialist, when I went to go travel there for 2 weeks, I met a fellow patient and we bonded over our similar conditions. And so we just kept in touch for the months after that, just sending each other resources and interesting things that we found to be helpful. And so we both very much felt stuck. And at that point, I was thinking like, there has to be another way. So being a researcher myself, I was like, I'm going to treat this like a real research problem, and I'm going to really just turn over every rock that I could. And so I eventually came across Howard Schubiner's talk at Google, which was really illuminating. And I was like, I had heard of work that looked at how pain felt in various parts of the body are not necessarily an indication of structural damage. But it really had to be hammered home for me to really apply it to my current position, because it made so much sense from a structural perspective. Like the more I typed, the more I was in pain, the less I typed, the more okay I was. And so I kind of spun my wheels for a bit.
Yeah, it's hard to believe just how ill you can get, how much pain you can suffer just from what the brain is doing.
Totally.
When I first learned about this, I was skeptical too.
It's hard to believe. Yeah. And then I sent my friend Howard's talk, and he was like, it's such amazing timing. I had just discovered this other article that you just have to read. And it's this like HTML old website that I feel like I'd never come across otherwise. And it was someone telling their same story, very similar to mine, heavy work at the computer, hand pain, ground to a halt, all that. And they were basically like, you're not going to believe this, or you might be skeptical, but I read this book and then I got better. And now I type as much as I want and all this. And I was like, as a scientist, there's just no way. It set off all the red flags where I was like, there's just no chance that this is true. But I was so desperate. I was coming up on 2 years of just immense suffering.
Yeah, it can seem like the equivalent of, buy these crystals and sleep under them at night and you'll improve. I
Totally
get that.
It felt very much like that. But I was like, I'm going to really turn over every rock on this. I'm going to get after it. And so I was like, I'm going to get the book. So the book was The Mind Body Prescription by John Sarno. And I consumed the book in a day. I was on audiobooks because I couldn't even hold a book like this because it would cause a bunch of pain. And so I was just like walking furiously and listening to this book. And it's funny because having a psychology background, Sarno is very much influenced by Sigmund Freud. And being brought up in this field academically, Freud is not that positive of a figure. And so when I am looking at this material from Sarno, I'm like, this is still kind of unbelievable to me. It doesn't really make sense how, my internal rage or certain emotional pains are causing the pain that I'm feeling in my hands and in my neck and in all parts through my body. But I was like, fine, like I'll take whatever victory that I can get. I don't really care about my skepticism. And so I read the book in a day, and from that point, I was just like, let's see where this goes. And then as I start searching around there, I'm finding thousands of recovery stories that are just like the one that I had discovered that led to the book. And hearing each one of those just gained more and more momentum in my mind, thinking that maybe I can get better. And so in the later, within a few days, I was very much like, I feel oddly good, but let me not get ahead of myself. I was very careful and thorough with my treatment. And I think looking back, part of my problem was treating my recovery with the same intensity I treated everything else. But I was like, I'll take it. And so I was speaking with my wife, who actually also developed symptoms about 6 months after I did, not really doing very much computer work, but that was kind of just like an unexplained thing that I didn't really have a concept to wrap around. And so she and I were talking about Sarno's book, and she had gone on her own search, and she found Like Mind, Like Body, the podcast by Curable, and that made us find Curable. And I was like, let's go. I'm ready to dive in. And Curable was way more up to date in the sense of like the pain science and giving me just a more just a more current understanding of this. And so I still very much valued Sarno's perspective there, but it gave it to me in a way that made it way easier to consume. So I signed up for Curable, and I'm just doing it day and night, doing the exercises, I'm journaling, I'm unpacking all the deepest, darkest stuff that I can get to. And I just get better and better and better. And then within a month or two, I was like 95% better. And it was so mind-blowing to me. I was almost giddy because I was like, am I back? Like, this is really something. And so I just continued with Curable. And then within those few months, I was like, I'm pretty confident that I'm just back. And so this still has raised a lot of questions around like, do I have something that I will need to continue to manage throughout my life, or is this thing just gone? And so we can get a bit into what has happened since my full recovery. So the darkest time was through 2021 and 2022. And so early 2023, I'm like, I think I'm making the real comeback now. And so since then, it's become something where I'm like, I think I need to maintain it. So I've needed to work out over these past 2 years. What guardrails do I need to have in place to stay well?
Yeah. And what would you say was the biggest change in you personally, comparing 2023 to, let's say, 2020 or 2019, in the way you live your life?
Yeah, I think one metaphor that came up a bunch is the bank account metaphor. So one of my PTs was using this, saying, you make all these withdrawals, but you're not making many deposits. And that really resonated with me. Although I have lots to quibble about regarding like how good is that metaphor for a broader application. But just that point was enough to say, yeah, I can't be asking myself for huge amounts of hard work. And then, yeah, I spend an hour every evening or a half hour every evening to undo whatever damage. And I'll put that in air quotes because of the new understanding. And so from there, I feel like I needed to put in guardrails that were easy to meet and ones that were sufficiently doing their job. Part of this issue was like, I was great at setting goals and meeting them, but it's just bringing that intensity and obsession to it that was really the downfall. And so I created these guardrails. So I call them 3 buckets that I have to invest in: mind, body, and community. And so my goal was, I need to put something into those buckets daily. And I'm setting the lowest bar possible. So I have no excuse whatsoever to just meet those, just do something, reach out, connect with a friend, catch up with a family member. That's the community bucket. Mind bucket, make sure you journal, make sure you meditate, do something to invest in your mind. And it can't be work related. And same thing with the body. And so once I started that, I created a little habit tracker. And I was like, I'm just going to put this into practice. And since then, that has been just golden for me. And that has led me to stay well over these past couple of years. But I still feel like I was like almost like a superhero that lost my powers, like before to after that time period of having that significant chronic pain. And so in 2023, I was just starting to pick that up where I felt very much like I was recovered, but somewhat of a diminished version of myself. And so I started to really work on myself to get back to where I wanted to be, where I felt truly like myself again. And I started doing that through 2023. Had a interruption. I had a really bad bike fall where I broke my right elbow and left hand at the same time. And so that was like a 4-month pause in my recovery. And that was so frustrating. So that took me through most of the end of 2023. And I'm like, and I get to a point in October, November 2023 where I think, all right, I think I'm really ready to get back. And so I created this event called 33 for 33. I was about to turn 33 years old in March of 2024. And so I was several months out from that. And my personal record before was 32 miles in running, doing all sorts of races and stuff. And I was like, I'm going to do a 33-mile run for my third birthday to celebrate my comeback. And so I mentioned this to my brother-in-law.
That does sound kind of intense, Matt.
I know. And it was tough because I've been so afraid of returning to a level of intensity that I really enjoy. And that is very much a part of who I am. And so I mentioned this to my brother-in-law and he was like, I would join. And I was like, oh, that's a kind of interesting way to think about it. Let me just like float the idea to people where I can write up my own plan because it's not a race. It's a moving party, I was calling it. And it's a celebration of my comeback and my health. And so I asked people if they wanted to join. So I wrote up these different sections in our local New Haven area. And we had a bunch of people join at different parts of the celebration throughout the day. And it was a wonderful time, a wonderful celebration. We had a big feast at the end. And it ended up being really cool. And funny enough, so now I'm keeping the tradition alive. It went so well that I'm doing 34 for 34 in just over 1 week from today. So it's still going.
That sounds like a lot of fun. Okay, that's very helpful to understand. I'm interested in the dynamic around not feeling like you're at the level you could be with respect to your work or intellectually. I mean, you're putting energy into these other buckets. Is there a part of you that is feeling like, oh, I'm taking away from the person that I used to be? I'm not measuring up to the level of effort or accomplishment that I used to be at? And is there kind of a nagging guilt? A lot of my patients who begin the process of doing self-care for themselves in various ways, they feel guilty about it. They feel like when they're doing something that is purely for their own benefit, that they are consequently not doing something for their work, for other people in their lives. I mean, they're putting themselves on the list of people they take care of, but it's so new for them that they can't help but feel guilty about it, let's put it that way, or feel like they are in some way diminished in comparison to who they used to be.
Yeah, I don't quite feel guilt as much as I initially felt there being a void to fill, where we're thinking back to what I was saying about reaching that level of intensity that I wanted to get back to, where I thought I'm never going to get back there. But as I've worked through all of this, and have also gotten very much back there, where I feel like, oh, this is really a joy, where I could do this with way more wisdom. Because before, I very much had the mindset of, I'm going to run through the brick wall, and if it stops me, fine, then I'll, rebuild from there. I've definitely been humbled by this experience to approach these kinds of things more carefully. And so in many ways, this is a wiser level of go hard. And so that's been a work in progress over these past couple of years since my full recovery. And that has also entailed putting a lot more energy into others. And so it isn't guilt in caring for myself or spending more time on myself. I think part of my self-care is ensuring I stay connected to others. I very much feel like I thrive on that. And so I've been trying to make sure to keep the social life going and to make sure to stay connected to people, be open to new friendships and professional relationships like that. So I've very much expanded my horizons there. And that has been hugely helpful for my psychological and physical health, because there's so much work on this that we can thrive very much based on the wellness of our relationships. And so that's been a huge factor in my well-being.
Okay, so you're able to do all this, and this is not easy to do, but you're able to do this without feeling pulled back to 16 hours a day at the keyboard.
Yeah, I haven't quite gone to that level yet. That's quite off the rails. But I've gone pretty hard at the keyboard, but I feel like I have a much better barometer for just knowing when enough is enough or when I'm headed towards more of the danger zone. And so I try my reframing of, because I do still get sensations that are very much like the ones that I used to get, but I don't panic. And in many ways, they're my new alarm system. That's the way I've been thinking about.
Yeah, that's very important to use the body as a form of communication from your mind and letting you know when you're bumping up against.
Exactly. So when I get those sensations, it makes me ask those tough questions, because there have been times where, in the past year where I'm getting some intense pain and I'm like, I've done all the journaling. I've done all the thinking about this. I'm taking great care of myself. What's going on? And then you just got to dig a little bit deeper, especially and credit to Sarno and the many others that have worked on this, where the tough discovery for me was whenever someone suggested that this might be related to stress, I would introspect and think, I'm doing great up here. Like, I feel like all I want to do is work. This is awesome. Like, I don't want to stop. And so I'm not feeling particularly stressed, but I'm feeling it in my body. And so that's precisely it. So, things that are happening outside the realm of your conscious access is precisely the thing we need to get to. And so in many ways, that's not visible to us. And so that's what makes it a difficult problem to address.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's such a shift when people are able to use their physical symptoms as that form of communication, as that way to recognize that their mind is trying to tell them something and to try to figure out what the mind is trying to say. Let's shift to another area. Many of my patients find they get more long-term success if they can better understand where the intense drive originally came from. And this can be in a variety of different events or situations or people or ways you were treated as a kid. But if people can look back and recall anything that might have lit the fire under them back then, it can give a different perspective. And many people, when they do that, they're not seeing anything in particular. So in those situations, I'll often ask them to imagine a child of their own in the same situation, and they're watching that child, and are they seeing anything that they wouldn't like to see or that would make them sad or angry, that again might have been the source for this drive that ultimately led to physical symptoms. Does anything resonate for you there?
For me, it didn't seem to be related at all to these kinds of symptoms, because there is such a huge lag between my discovery of this about myself, that there's some intensity that I really enjoy and hold myself to, and then eventually paying some kind of consequence for that. And so in many ways that felt like a gift. Like, I felt like, ooh, if I just train harder, if I just work a bit harder, then I'm going to see some rewards. And all it did was reward me. And so that was really tough to grapple with once I saw that was a part of the problem. And so in many ways, that was something I had to eventually meet head on. And so that took a lot of soul searching and thinking about my identity and all of that. And so that was a lot to grapple with, but it wasn't very rooted in things like major stress events or trauma happening in childhood, to my knowledge. And so it's the big lag between the original starting of that kind of approach to life and eventually getting symptoms made it much more difficult to pin down.
Okay. So it sounds like you are okay with the new mat, that the relatively small backing off on the intensity is something that you feel okay with. You're not feeling like, oh, I was just too weak to handle my own stress before. That's not your attitude, that it's more like you are shifting priorities, perhaps I could say. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it does sound like you've made a mental shift in how you look at yourself so that you're able to put the intensity into different areas than you did before and be okay with it. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, that's definitely a fair statement. And also just changing the time horizon has been a factor here, where I think about, just my research career and doing what I spend most of my days doing. I think about, if I want to do this for 40 more years, 50 more years, I better be taking good care of myself. And so thinking about, there's a great phrase. It's something like, we overestimate what we can do in a year. We overestimate what we can do in a day, but we underestimate what we can do in a year. And so thinking a bit longer term has been really helpful for me, where it's like, on any given day, I'm only going to get so much done, and I can't try to ram everything I can possible into each day. Having this broader perspective has been really helpful. So in many ways, I feel like I've gotten back to a similar level of intensity. It's just that I'm playing the longer game much better than I was.
Yeah, that's such an important mental shift. I find for myself also that whenever I am a little frustrated that I haven't changed the world yet, I can look back, a year, 5 years, 10 years, and see how far the work that I'm doing has come. And that's, tremendously reassuring, that when I think about where we were 10, 15 years ago in the movement to educate people about neuroplastic symptoms, we were just a tiny fraction of where we are today in so many dimensions. And that's reassuring that I'm probably doing an okay job. One other area that I like to inquire about is in close personal relationships, whether it's your wife or with other people. These same issues we've been discussing can play out in those areas as well. Many of my patients were not very successful, let's say, in their early close personal relationships. One example is that they might have been putting their intensity on the partner that they were with, because that partner had lots of needs for that intensity, and there ended up being a lack of balance in the relationship, where my patient was giving a whole lot to the other person and not getting as much back in return. And it was part of their healing journey to reach a place where they felt that balance was something that they deserved and they needed, and they began having much more successful relationships, much more balanced relationships. Does that reflect anything of your own journey? It certainly doesn't for everybody.
Yeah, I'd say it's a combination between a couple of things. So the relationships themselves, certainly the tensions with friendships and family members, definitely I think were a contributing factor. But that happening at the same time of the pandemic really taking off, I think, is not a coincidence. So the social isolation that came with that is a big factor, because if you're nourished by spending quality time with loved ones and that is suddenly reduced to nothing or near nothing, that's a significant factor. And so it ended up being a multiplier of the problem, because you take away the nourishing aspect. And then I was like, oh, I've just got way more time to work, so I'm just going to work that much more. And so that ended up doubling down on the thing that was causing the symptoms. And so those things together really crank things up quite a bit.
Okay. Yeah, that makes complete sense. One other element that I look for is that some of my patients actually got worse or had their symptoms triggered at the same time that they found themselves in a very warm, loving, supportive, mutually beneficial relationship. So I'll ask, was there any coincidence in timing between your illness and becoming close with the woman who's now your wife?
Yes. One big factor that only makes sense looking back now is the timing of her symptoms. And so she started to develop her own neuroplastic symptoms about 6 months after I did. And this didn't fully make sense to us at the time. And then once I had read Sarno's book, he talks about some of these conditions being contagious in a way. And it was kind of mind blowing, because it's like, how could that even, what's the mechanism for that even happening? And it all started to fall into place once I started to fill in the gaps in my own knowledge. And so, my wife talks a bit about how caring for me in my really struggling state might have contributed to the development of her symptoms. And so I'm sure that's a factor there. And then you're in this spiral together because it's always a topic of conversation when you're really going through it. Like every bit of our day was designed around managing these really horrible symptoms. And so I think that's a factor there, having difficult times with friends and family members at times. And then just like the greater socio-political situation happening at that time, or it's not that necessarily being the direct effect, is that that's leading to really tough conversations, things that are stressing you out. And so then you're not being nourished by your social interactions. You're coming away even more stressed, fighting about various lockdowns. How careful are you being, managing your COVID testing, all these things flying around at the same time as other factors that I'm sure were pretty central in addition to them in causing the symptoms.
Yeah, that's very clear and makes complete sense. It's still, I'm reflecting how remarkable it is that you have access to some of the best clinicians in the world, and what was successful for you was a book and an app. And, there's a physician there in New Haven who writes a column about unusual cases. And the column is always about unusual biomedical situations. She has never written a column about a mind-body condition, even though it causes all kinds of baffling symptoms, baffling to the traditional healthcare profession, and has a great solution. So there's still a lot of work to be done before the kind of care that ultimately helped you becomes routine in our system.
Absolutely. And as we've discussed, a big thing that I'm on now is like, I want to be part of making that happen. And I'm thinking about like, I've got all these skills and expertise in my particular areas that I work in. But then having been a patient myself that has suffered from these issues, I'm like, let's put these things together and really make it happen. Because initially, when I was still going through it, I would have this fantasy of like, as soon as I get better, I'm going to spread this word. I'm going to just give talks all over. I'm going to make it happen. And then the second I felt like I was better, I was like, I cannot wait to not think about this ever again. And so it's kind of been over the past 2 years where I've just really settled into a healthier life, and being able to manage this level of intensity that I really enjoy, but also my health, where I've really started to put it together where I'm like, what would it really take to tackle this issue on a mass scale and to really put a dent in this absolutely giant problem? And I think we're getting somewhere with those thoughts. So I'm thrilled to be able to work on that.
Yes, we are. And it's wonderful that you're willing to provide that kind of support and bring your enormous skills to bear on this, because I think it's going to make a difference. So one last question that I had is, are you feeling like the changes that you've made are going to be solid and stable and effective for you for the years to come? Does it feel like you have arrived at a different place, a different mindset that's going to keep you out of this kind of symptom indefinitely?
I think so. I think I'm on the other side of it, but I can't let the guardrails down. I've mostly, it's been an interesting transition, because initially I had to put up guardrails where I was like, I'm going to be happy to go off the rails real quick the moment I have a chance. And then it got maybe a year into that where I was starting to get some feeling like, I actually don't want to go outside the guardrails anymore.
Great.
And so that's kind of been mind-blowing to me, because it's in many ways like you've trained it up well enough that it happens organically. And so I want to still be careful, because I've learned my lesson real good. And so I think I'm there, but I very much feel the need to continue to maintain. Like, I have to try to stay well. And I think that's an important lesson for all of us. I've struggled a lot with like, am I grateful for having gone through that? And, it's easy to go on the other side and say that, but I think for 2 minutes about it, I'm like, it would have been real nice to never have gone through that. But in many ways, I wouldn't have this way of living without it. And so I needed to learn that lesson. So I'm not super happy that I went through it, but also it seems that something that intense was required for me to build up robust enough resistance to this kind of thing in order to just continue to thrive and stay out of pain like that. And then also I feel like I've gotten to a point where I'm able to spread the word very effectively as a messenger for this kind of thing. And so I've helped many friends already where I'm starting to see the same thing. And now that I've got this lens, I'm seeing it everywhere. And so, I think I'm headed to a good place with that.
Once you see it, you can't unsee it. And I've seen that with so many of the clinicians that I've taught over the years. And anybody who watches this podcast, there are going to be a lot of them that resonate with your story, and you're going to be the one that launches them onto their own journey of ultimately healing from this. So I really appreciate your contribution to the podcast today. Before we close, anything else that you would like to share or questions that you have for me?
I could definitely get into it all day around the specifics of like, is it really, a hyperactive nervous system? Is it really buried trauma? All that. So I'll put that aside for just a more extended conversation. But I just want to say thank you, and thank you for doing this super important work. And I do hope that this podcast and this message can help spread the word. And just to say to folks, if you've got issues like this, feel free to reach out anytime. It would be a joy to help you through this, just like I've had many people in my life that were generous with their time. So reach out.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And I'm looking forward to working together to make this change in the healthcare system. Thank you.
Same here. Thank you.